and here is Bob Cooke, and we are on our 204th episode today, Bob. We are looking at the importance of ruptures and how we resolve them in the therapy room.
Great, and let's start, as I in the last 2 or 3 have started, let's start with yourself, Kellie. Tell me a little bit, podcast doesn't mean this to start the discussion off. The title is The Importance of what? Say it again, the importance of what?
The importance of ruptures and how we resolve them in the therapy room.
Resolving is the important thing. So what's your thoughts when you read the discussion we're going to have now?
Well, I think of rupture and repair. I think of them as together. I was thinking about mistakes I've made when I was a trainee and how I didn't. There was some clients that left therapy because I couldn't repair it, and but now actually I think I'm really I'm better at it, much better. I'm very encouraging of clients to tell me what's happening for them. So to tell me how I've missed them, or how what did I get wrong for them in whatever way it was. I'm always up for listening. And so, but I have been wondering about, can we, or are we good therapists if we are avoiding ruptures? Is it part of the actual work that there's going to be some frustration and that the client, there'll be some rupture somewhere?
Well, yes and yes. So do you remember perhaps in your trainee sort of days and examples of ruptures that perhaps were challenging to repair?
In my trainee as a therapist?
When you were saying, in your clinical practice?
Yes. So in the early days, I had a client who was using alcohol a lot.
Oh, okay.
And she had a drink before she came into the session.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't catch myself quickly, and she heard me, from my critical parent, and I said something like, "What? You've had a drink?" And I just repeated her history with her mum, and she would, and I, kept messaging her and said, please come back, let's process this. But she, I think I'd probably shamed her too much, and she wasn't willing to come back.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, shame and that'd be a podcast, shame in the actual therapy room. Yeah. So
I'll write that down.
But what you're saying, as you became more experienced, you were able to not only learn from experience and catch the process quicker, but also find out a little bit about the impact of what the rupture meant for the client and account for where they are.
Yeah, because if there's been a rupture, I'm imagining something's been replayed from history, and I've stepped into something that unconsciously I didn't realise. I mean, I could see it very clearly with the client and the alcohol, but sometimes I might not know what I've said or how I've looked, or something might have gone on out of my awareness.
Yeah, I think that beneath ruptures, as we're in a co-created relationship, there nearly always is a drama being played out. And it's always an enactment from their script. And somehow we become a player in that enactment. And I think it's a therapist's job, actually, to explore more the rupture, take responsibility of their part in it, and explore and account for any familiarity and enactment and history.
Yeah, I fully agree. We have to own our part. It's not the client on their own. They're not in a vacuum. It's absolutely with us.
And I agree with what you said right at the beginning, which is we can look at what ruptures are in a bit more depth, I think, but we'll just use it now. That a rupture can be caused unconsciously, in a way, by both parties.
Yes.
And we are in a co-created relationship.
Yeah.
So the therapist needs to take it to supervision usually.
Yeah.
Explore with the client once they've taken their responsibility for their part of it. That's the therapist I'm talking about. Talk about if this process is familiar for them in any way.
Yeah.
and look at how it might be a repetitive pattern from their history,
Mm.
and see how that could be enacting out something in the therapy room.
Mm.
Cool.
I was going to say, what I love about that process is that the more we explore it, the client gets to choose a different outcome. They don't have to replay the old pattern, and we can meet each other in that repair.
Yeah, and when it hasn't worked, and I was thinking, it's when one of us or both of us, as client and the therapist, haven't kept and or aren't able to make the other person okay enough
Mm.
to stay in the relationship.
Mm. Yes.
In other words, the projection has been so intense
Mm.
that they aren't able to move to an I'm okay, you're okay
Mm.
position. That's when payoff to games can happen.
Mm. Yes.
Mm. But I think it's inevitable.
Yes, I kind of do. I think part of me thinks if the client's not frustrated somewhere, then something is amiss.
Mm.
Or
Yeah, and by definition, clients will be testing out therapists
mm.
unconsciously. I'm talking
Mm.
about. There might be some consciousness in it, but I think unconsciously for most people, most part, and they will be playing behavioural repetitive patterns with the therapist. And it's the therapist's job really through their own training, their own supervision, their own therapy, to be able to take ownership of what's happening in the process and
Mm.
feed it back to the client.
Yeah, well, it is our job to keep the client okay at all times.
Is it? That's an interesting sentence.
Mm.
That's a really interesting sentence. Tell me a little bit more about that thinking.
Mm.
I'm not saying it's wrong or right.
Yeah,
I'm just,
yeah. Well, it's like they're working through stuff. So if they're bringing it, it's like it's okay to bring whatever they're bringing. I mean, as long as they're not being violent or aggressive or smashing the room up or like everything that they bring is okay. It's a safe space to bring.
oh, you mean from that frame, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, I agree. Then I think it is important. Why I thought about it is because I think a lot of therapists struggle to do that
Yeah.
because the client wants the opposite.
What do you mean? Wants the opposite?
Well, if they've had a history
Mm.
where they've been abused or they've been not valued or they've been trashed or whichever language you want to use,
Mm.
then they they may or may not make but the therapist okay, but sorry, their significant other's okay, but they they often might make them not okay. So somewhere psychologically, when they go into therapy,
Mm-hmm.
they will be making the therapist not okay
Mm.
until the therapist proves that they can be seen
Mm.
as okay.
Yes. Yeah. So is that until the client believes that we can hold the space?
Or is a trusted object.
Okay. Mm.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Hold the space, create a safe environment, provide a structure, dependability, consistency, predictability, that the client can dare to trust the client for a little bit,
Mm. Yeah.
those things. So
Mm.
they may not easily make the therapist okay. I would almost go far to argue that in most cases that's the way it is.
Oh, really?
Because,
Wow.
yeah, because most of the clients we see, well, perhaps not you, but over my history, they've had situations where the significant other has not been okay.
Mm. Mm.
So they sort of expect somewhere psychologically in their script for the therapist to be not okay until they prove they are okay.
Mm. That's really fascinating. I've never thought about it like that. So the expectation is that we'll somehow let them down.
Or I think always. No,
Wow.
I can't always say 100% no. I was always trying to say not 100%, and so I don't think it's 100%. But I would say a majority of the time that's the
Mm.
case.
So are you thinking that, when the client comes in, is that
Yes,
oh wow.
that's always in my head.
Okay.
That for them,
Yeah.
I'm saying from an adult place at
Mm.
all.
Yeah.
I'm talking from a younger part
Mm.
where life has been so hard for them, and the significant other hasn't been okay,
Mm.
that they will need me to prove that I am okay. Until that place is reached,
Mm-hmm.
that for me, that's the first phase of therapy.
Mm. And so, and do you think that they need to, that's the testing? Do they,
Yeah,
okay.
that's the working out that
Mm.
you are okay after all.
Yeah.
I can allow myself to be a little bit vulnerable with you,
Mm.
maybe.
Mm.
And maybe I can dip my foot in the water and you won't be like all the others in my life and chop my foot off before I can even get in the water in the first place.
Mm. Yeah.
So I think it's a real challenge for clients when they move into therapy to get to a place where they can trust the therapist.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that makes absolute sense. But I suppose I've not really thought about the client thinking I was not okay from the beginning.
Or not conscious. See, I don't think
Yes. Yeah.
conscious process,
Mm.
that's what I'm trying to say
Mm.
to you. From
Mm.
an adult place, yes.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the younger part,
Mm.
which has been around people who've been not okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, interestingly, I don't expect people to see me okay.
Hmm.
Psychologically, I'm talking
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
when they enter therapy. So I see the first part of therapy is always about getting that trusting relationship somehow.
Hmm. Yeah. I was just thinking how um hmm, difficult, is that the right word? Thinking about trainees, but and then I suppose they're probably not going to be working with such disturbed clients.
Oh, well, that's an interesting one. You're right, because at most placements, certainly mine, because I do the
Mm.
mental health assessments, I wouldn't send disturbed people to them.
Mm. Yeah.
There's a continuum of disturbance from a sort of let's put it let's use like the neurotic
Hmm.
population,
Yeah.
right up heavily disturbed people. So
Hmm.
that they're sort of filtered out.
Yeah.
So you're correct. However, I think I think you know I think from a word dot, neurotic or otherwise, especially if they're heavily disturbed, certainly by definition, that therapists have to prove themselves
Mm. Yes.
psychologically to the
Mm.
younger child.
Mm.
Not many people go into therapy, surely, and start. Well, actually, this is another story for disturbed clients, but where they start immediately from the word dot, exposing their vulnerable self.
Mm.
Some clients do, but they usually are disturbed because
Yeah.
they haven't got that protective
Mm.
mechanism
Yeah.
established to do that. But in the neurotic population, where that protective regulation usually is there in some ways, they won't step straight into working
Mm.
in a really deep way
Mm.
until they know that the therapist in some ways is okay to be able to be trusted.
Mm.
So the therapist has to do something.
Mm.
Some people might say just by being there is enough. I'm not sure that's correct, by the way.
Mm.
Um, so the other person will see them as okay. Now, ruptures are really important here because, there'll be many tests, processes of testing the therapist out, testing themselves out. Uh, Things might happen where the therapist has inadvertently, because they're a beginning therapist, or even experienced therapist, not valued, accepted, honored the younger child, and then you get ruptures. Now, if the therapist is able to take ownership and examine all that more, that can be resolved easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they
What?
have to be able to do that.
Mm. What if the client won't come back though? Like with my client when I was in my early days, and they won't come back. That's just there's nothing we can do.
Oh, I think there is something you can do. And I still think that they may or may not come back.
Mm.
Um, But you see, you were very early on in your training or therapy or whatever it is as a therapist. So, you know, maybe it was too early in the day. I don't know. But there are things we can do. We can phone people up. We can
Mm,
text them. We can,
mm,
and in these modern worlds of science and technology, you've got all sorts of different ways. But basically, get in touch with them.
mm,
And, you know, ask them to come back or get in touch with them or whatever it is. Now, if they continue not to come back or
mhm,
don't move into dialogue or whatever it
mm,
is, then all you're left with is to say really goodbye for yourself,
mm,
do the closure yourself
mhm.
if they aren't prepared to come back from closure.
Yeah.
And the next most important thing is to take it to supervision.
Yes, always. Yeah, yeah. It took me a while to learn about the importance of the goodbye. If even if, like for example, with my client, even though I contacted her many times, offered free session, let's work it out, it was like, oh, actually, I need the goodbye is important for me too. It's not just about the client saying goodbye. I need to say that. And I've heard clients do that, therapists do that in other ways. Some therapists write or, send a letter, send an email or a letter. Um, I
To
would
a,
usually, yeah, I'd usually probably send a text, but
to a counselor and say goodbye, have
yeah,
some
yeah,
closure.
yeah.
So I think you are correct, absolutely 100% correct when you said, and I stopped saying 100%. I don't know, a large percentage. When you say ruptures are inevitable, because I think they are.
Yeah.
That's the bit. The most important thing isn't whether ruptures happen or they don't happen, because I think they always will.
Mm,
And if they don't, something's afoot, I think.
mm,
Um, it's how the therapist resolves the rupture,
mm,
that there can be so that the therapy can continue, and also, in fact, perhaps even a stronger relationship, because maybe you'll account for them in a way that they've never had before.
mm. So give them a different outcome.
Mm,
Mm,
absolutely. You know, some people might call that reparative therapy.
yeah.
So I think they're inevitable, and I
Hmm.
think they are inevitable. Perhaps the therapy's too nice, too adapted, too
Mm,
cozy, to whatever it is. I don't know, but certainly something to think about. And the most important thing about this for therapists is how we pick up on the ruptures and how we pay attention to resolving them if we can.
mm, yeah.
And the client might get a different outcome.
Mm, yeah. I'm, I'm thinking that, I've had clients where there's been no ruptures, but those clients tend to be, they really want to come in and do the work and they've kind of rolled the sleeves up and they're,
Mm. Or Kelly,
mm,
or Kelly,
mm.
smiling when I say this, ruptures you might not know about.
Well, yes, that's what I was thinking. I was like, oh, have I missed them? And
Yeah,
I've been
yeah.
oblivious.
You might never know about it. You might have passed the test, you don't know about it. In other
Mm,
words, there's a rupture and they heal it themselves
mm,
because your action has been one of accounting and valuing and co-creation of completely different outcome. And you may never know because they don't actually tell you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a nice thought.
Well, I think it's an important one to think about because I
Yeah.
actually do think ruptures will always happen because to feel safe and secure, even you might have a very structured environment, other things we talked about last week.
Mm,
I think by definition, they will probably test therapists out.
mm, yeah. And I'm up for that actually. I'm really up for the dialogue in the room. If something's not working, I really want to know about that. And
Mm.
that's and the review, the regular review, like of the contract, like where are we at and how are we
Mm.
getting there. But I always encourage clients to talk to me if there's something's askew that I have missed. I hope they do, but who knows actually.
I think in accounting for the rupture, the therapist needs to be very specific.
Mm,
They need to take ownership and
mhm,
responsibility for their part in it.
mm,
They need to acknowledge that and they need to follow it up by saying to the client, is this also familiar in any way?
And then process that bit.
Mm. Your bit first is the taking ownership.
Yeah.
Now, therapists have got high egos or even narcissistic traits, God forbid, or haven't had the therapy they need to have, might find that bit more challenging.
Well, yes, and I suppose I was thinking about trainees or early starting therapists who then might move into, so either the bit of feeling like it's criticized, and that's hard, isn't it? When we're starting out, we're trying to get it right. But the other bit of like, then they might step into making themselves not okay and move into kind of criticizing themselves
Mm.
that they got it wrong.
Yeah. And now we're moving into the maybe analysis of transfers
Yeah.
and what both parties might be doing in terms of projection and counter transfers. That's why it's very important to talk about all this in supervision.
Supervision, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that I love that about supervision, that the supervisor can just sees it so clearly.
Well, I don't know if they do, but I do think the added bit for supervisors, and you're right now on cue because I'm currently running a supervision certificate course, and we're talking exactly about what you're talking about here. The thing about the supervisors, they are distant from a co-created relationship of
Yeah.
the therapist and client. So, because of the distance, they might be able to offer a different perspective. Now, the danger is in the world of parallel process that you go to your supervisor and say you're stuck, and then the supervisor also feels stuck. And instead of thinking, well, I wonder where this whole started. Did it start with the client feeling stuck, and did they get stuck before, and they pass the stuckness onto the therapist, and the therapist goes away and passes the stuckness onto the supervisor. So if the supervisor doesn't start realizing parallel processes, they might actually end up enacting a whole process themselves. But in what I think are more skilled, well, not a different supervision, perhaps, which is more effective. The supervisor can help the therapist have a new perspective so they can step outside the transferential mire and help
Yeah.
the client get a different outcome.
And it's such a relief. Well, it is for me when I'm in supervision and the supervisor just, can go, blah, 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 what was transfers. And then I go, oh, that's it. Because I was feeling all these feelings. I was owning it as if it was mine or moving into a critical place. And then when it gets named and we can see it, I can put it down. It's such a relief.
Yeah, I think supervision and personal zone therapy is really important.
Yeah.
What we're talking about here in general.
Yeah, I agree.
I like talking about Ruptures. I expect we're coming to the end, but I just want to finish and say I really do to everybody listening here that ruptures are inevitable, and it's not that they won't happen because it's not about therapists trying to, do perfect therapy somehow. Ruptures will happen. It's how the counselor or therapist attends, acknowledges the ruptures.
Yeah. And if they attend to it and acknowledge it and own their part, there's a very good chance that you will repair it.
Yeah, and this is the next bit, if the therapist can take it back to the client's history,
Yeah.
and see where it all began in their history.
Yeah.
That's the trick.
So it's kind of moving it from the therapist has just kind of been the catalyst or the magnifying glass of this process.
Yeah.
It's not about the therapist.
That's a really good way of looking at this.
So the client can then own it and see it as their process and then address it. And
it doesn't mean the therapist hasn't, been part of this whole process, but it means that at least the client has a sense of seeing maybe what's being enacted out.
Yeah.
And a different outcome might happen then, as you said earlier.
And it's a wonderful process for that, I think, therapy, that the client will invite us into the process. We'll do the thing. Well, there'll be the rupture, but then we get to repair it and work on it. But if that hadn't have happened, that rupture hadn't have happened, then we might have missed it, and the client could be redoing that in their lives all the time.
All the time. And what they'll do probably, or could do, is leave therapy far too early. Leave therapy, make the therapist not okay, and repeat history in some way.
Yeah.
And so the chance for effective therapy is gone.
Yeah. And that's a great shame. It is a great shame.
It is, and in a way, I like what you said. In a way, it is the duty of therapists to do training, actually, more than anything else, and experience, to think the ways that we've just been talking in terms of transference and what's happening in the co-creative relationship, so that we can look at the repetitive patterns that have been played out and help the client have a reparative and different outcome.
And then they have a new way of being in the world instead of repeating the old pattern. Yeah. Well, Bob, that feels like a lovely ending.
Yeah. I enjoyed talking about it, and I think we were talking about some of the real nuts and bolts of a co-created therapeutic relationship. Thank you for allowing me to talk. About what I really like talking about.
Yeah, well, thank you for talking. I find it very interesting, and it's really well, I enjoy hearing all your knowledge, actually, because when you talk, there's always a new thing I've not heard and said it in that way.
I've joined you, and I really realise how you're settling in now, Kellie. So
yes,
thank you. And another thing I do want to say before we end is take account for the hard work that you're doing behind the scenes in learning all these things that Jackie did sort of over 4 years automatically, but actually it's not automatically. You have to learn, how to publish the whole video, how to put it on Spotify, how to do this, how to do that. So I do want to thank you for that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to continue with the show.
Received, and thanks for saying that, Bob. Yeah, it's like it's a whole new profession.
It is, in a way. Yeah, I'm glad you're the host from that point of view. Otherwise, if I had to be the host as well, my gosh, I don't know if my well, anyway, I'm glad you're doing it, so thank you.
Yes. Well, hopefully I'll be professional soon in my technical skills.
Oh, no, that'll take too long.
Super.
Okay, thank you. And what's next week?
So next week it is, does the therapist's gender play a crucial part in the therapy room?
Yes. Now that is such an interesting one. I'm not going to fall into the trap.
Stop talking about it.
Talking about it. Take away all the knowledge for the next week. So I'm looking forward to talking about that.
Yeah.
So I'll see you next week.
Yeah, lovely to see you, Bob. See you next time.
Bye.
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 You've been listening to The Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'll be back next week with another episode.